What I'm about to tell you will fundamentally change how you see the Supreme Court, the Justice Department, and the lengths some people will go to protect the most powerful secrets in Washington. And I don't say that lightly. Yesterday, Senator Cory Booker did something that has sent shockwaves through the highest levels of government. He didn't just ask questions, he didn't just demand answers. He exposed a coordinated cover-up involving Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh and Attorney General Bondi that goes to the very heart of our democracy. Most people think they understand what happened with the Epstein files. Most people believe the story ended when Jeffrey Epstein died in that prison cell. But what Cory Booker revealed yesterday proves that the most dangerous part of this story is still being written. And the people writing it are some of the most powerful figures in our government. Before we go any further, please subscribe to this channel, because what I'm about to share with you is information that certain people in Washington desperately don't want you to hear. Let me start with what everyone thought they knew. For years, politicians from both parties promised transparency about Jeffrey Epstein. They promised that the American people would get answers. They promised that the full scope of his network, his connections, his influence would finally be revealed. Donald Trump himself promised this. Bondi promised this. Even Brett Kavanaugh, during his confirmation hearings, spoke about the importance of transparency and justice. But here's what nobody realized was happening behind the scenes. While they were making these promises publicly, privately, they were working together to ensure that the most damaging information would never see the light of day. The Epstein files aren't just documents. They're a roadmap to power, influence, and corruption at the highest levels. And yesterday, Cory Booker proved that Brett Kavanaugh and Bondi have been actively working to keep that roadmap buried. Think about what this means. We're not talking about political disagreements. We're not talking about policy disputes. We're talking about a systematic effort by a Supreme Court justice and the Attorney General of the United States to obstruct justice and hide the truth from the American people. That's not politics, that's conspiracy. Here's how we got to yesterday's explosive moment. 3 weeks ago, Congress passed bipartisan legislation requiring the Department of Justice to release the complete Epstein files within 30 days. It wasn't a request. It was the law. The vote was overwhelming. Republicans and Democrats came together because they understood that the American people deserved answers. The bill was clear, specific, and left no room for interpretation. But then, something strange started happening. Days passed, then weeks. And instead of compliance, we got excuses. We got delays. We got bureaucratic runarounds. Attorney General Bondi claimed the files needed additional review for national security purposes. She said the Justice Department was working diligently to comply, but needed more time to redact sensitive information. That might have sounded reasonable to some people, but not to Cory Booker, because Cory Booker had been asking questions that nobody else was asking. He had been digging into something that everyone else missed. He discovered that Brett Kavanaugh had been having private communications with the Justice Department about these files. Communications that should never have happened. Let me explain why this is so significant. Supreme Court justices are supposed to be independent. They're not supposed to coordinate with the executive branch on matters that might come before the court. They're not supposed to give advice to the Attorney General about law enforcement decisions. They're certainly not supposed to be involved in discussions about whether evidence of potential crimes should be released to the public. But that's exactly what Brett Kavanaugh was doing. And yesterday, Cory Booker proved it. During a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing, Booker didn't waste time with pleasantries. He didn't engage in the usual political theater. He came armed with documents, with dates, with evidence that nobody expected him to have. He looked directly at the representatives from the Justice Department and said words that will echo through history. This is a cover-up, and we have proof. The silence in that room was deafening, because everyone knew that Cory Booker doesn't make accusations like that unless he can back them up. And what he revealed next shocked even his fellow senators. Booker had obtained records showing that Brett Kavanaugh had initiated contact with Bondi's office just 2 days after the Epstein files legislation passed. Not the other way around. Kavanaugh reached out to them. A sitting Supreme Court justice proactively contacted the Attorney General about pending litigation and law enforcement matters. That alone is a violation of judicial ethics that should result in his removal from the bench. But it gets worse, much worse, because Booker's investigation revealed that this wasn't an isolated incident. Kavanaugh and Bondi had been in regular communication about the Epstein matter for months. They had developed what Booker called a coordinated strategy to minimize disclosure and protect certain individuals whose names appear in the files. Think about that phrase, protect certain individuals. These two officials, who swore oaths to uphold justice and serve the American people, were working together to protect people whose names appear in files related to Jeffrey Epstein. Not to protect national security, not to protect ongoing investigations, to protect individuals. Who are these individuals? What did they do? Why do they need protection from a Supreme Court justice and the Attorney General? These are questions that Kavanaugh and Bondi clearly don't want answered. And that's exactly why their behavior is so damning. Booker didn't stop there. He revealed that his investigation had uncovered what he called a pattern of obstruction that goes beyond these files. He showed evidence that Kavanaugh had been improperly involved in Justice Department matters since his confirmation to the Supreme Court. Communications about pending cases, advice about legal strategies, coordination on matters that should have been decided independently. This is not how our system is supposed to work. The separation of powers exists for a reason. When a Supreme Court justice starts coordinating with the Attorney General on law enforcement matters, we don't have independent branches of government anymore. We have a conspiracy. And the conspiracy gets deeper when you understand what else Booker uncovered. Because it turns out that Kavanaugh's involvement wasn't limited to advice and coordination. According to documents Booker obtained, Kavanaugh actually helped draft the legal arguments that Bondi's Justice Department has been using to delay and limit the release of the Epstein files. Read that again? A Supreme Court justice helped write the legal arguments that the executive branch is using to avoid complying with a law passed by Congress. If that's not a constitutional crisis, I don't know what is. But here's where it gets even more disturbing. Because Booker's investigation revealed that Kavanaugh and Bondi weren't just working to delay the release of the files. They were working to ensure that certain portions of the files would never be released. Ever. They had developed what Booker described as a permanent suppression strategy designed to keep the most damaging information buried forever. This wasn't about national security. This wasn't about protecting ongoing investigations. This was about protecting people whose exposure would threaten the very foundations of power in Washington. And Kavanaugh and Bondi appointed themselves as the guardians of those secrets. When Booker confronted the Justice Department representatives with this evidence, their response was telling. They didn't deny the communications. They didn't dispute the timeline. They didn't challenge the authenticity of the documents. Instead, they claimed that everything was appropriate and within normal protocols. Normal protocols? Since when is it normal for a Supreme Court justice to coordinate with the Attorney General on matters of law enforcement? Since when is it normal for a justice to help draft arguments that the executive branch will use in potential litigation? Since when is it normal for these two branches of government to work together to permanently suppress evidence that Congress has demanded? The answer is simple. It's not normal. It has never been normal. And it represents a fundamental breakdown in the constitutional system that has protected American democracy for more than 2 centuries. But Booker wasn't finished, because his investigation had revealed something even more shocking. The communications between Kavanaugh and Bondi weren't just about the Epstein files. They had been coordinating on multiple matters involving high-profile individuals, powerful corporations, and political figures. What Booker uncovered was evidence of a systematic effort by these two officials to use their positions to protect certain people from accountability. This is what Booker meant when he called it a cover-up. Not just covering up the Epstein files, covering up a pattern of behavior where justice is determined not by law and evidence, but by power and connections, where the Supreme Court and the Justice Department work together to ensure that certain people are above the law. Think about what this means for every case that comes before the Supreme Court. Think about what it means for every decision that the Justice Department makes. If Kavanaugh and Bondi have been coordinating secretly on matters of justice and law enforcement, how can we trust that any of their decisions are independent? How can we believe that justice is blind when the people administering it are working together to protect the powerful? The implications go far beyond the Epstein files. This revelation calls into question the legitimacy of the Supreme Court itself. If justices are secretly coordinating with the executive branch, then the court is not the independent institution it claims to be. It's part of a coordinated system designed to protect the interests of the powerful at the expense of justice. And that's exactly what Booker was warning us about. In his closing statement yesterday, he didn't just call for investigations. He didn't just demand accountability. He issued a warning that should terrify every American who believes in democracy and the rule of law. He said that what he had uncovered was evidence of the complete corruption of our constitutional system. He said that when Supreme Court justices and attorneys general work together to suppress evidence and protect the powerful, we no longer have a democracy. We have an oligarchy where law serves power instead of justice. Those are strong words, but they're accurate words because that's exactly what we're looking at. A system where the people who are supposed to enforce the law and interpret the Constitution are working together to ensure that certain people are above both. The response from Kavanaugh and Bondi to Booker's revelations has been predictably defensive. Kavanaugh issued a statement through the Supreme Court claiming that his communications with the Justice Department were appropriate consultations on matters of judicial administration. But judicial administration doesn't include law enforcement decisions about evidence release. Judicial administration doesn't include helping to draft legal arguments for the executive branch. Bondi's response was even more telling. She didn't deny the communications. She didn't dispute Booker's evidence. Instead, she attacked Booker himself, claiming that his investigation was politically motivated and designed to undermine confidence in our institutions. But undermining confidence in institutions isn't what Booker did. Booker exposed the behavior that should undermine confidence in institutions. When Supreme Court justices and attorneys general work together to suppress evidence and protect the powerful, our confidence in those institutions should be undermined. That's not Booker's fault. That's their fault. And that's why this moment is so important, because we're at a crossroads. We can either demand accountability for this behavior, or we can accept that this is how our government operates now. We can either insist that Supreme Court justices and attorneys general follow the law and respect the Constitution, or we can accept that they're above both. Booker has given us the evidence. He has shown us the documents. He has revealed the pattern of behavior. The question now is what we do with that information. If we do nothing, if we let this slide, if we accept excuses and deflections, then we're accepting that our democracy has fundamentally changed. We're accepting that justice serves power instead of the people. We're accepting that the Constitution is just a piece of paper that powerful people can ignore whenever it's convenient. But if we demand accountability, if we insist on investigations, if we refuse to accept this corruption, then we still have a chance to save our democratic system. We still have a chance to ensure that law and justice mean something. That's why Booker's courage yesterday was so important. He could have stayed quiet. He could have avoided making waves. He could have played it safe. But instead, he chose to speak truth to power. He chose to expose corruption even when he knew it would make him enemies. He chose to defend our democracy even when he knew the cost would be high. The question now is whether the rest of us will follow his lead, whether Congress will investigate, whether the media will pursue this story, whether the American people will demand answers, because this is our moment. This is our test. This is when we find out whether we still believe in democracy and the rule of law, or whether we're willing to let powerful people operate above both. I know what side I'm on. I'm with Cory Booker. I'm with democracy. I'm with the rule of law. I'm with the idea that no one, no matter how powerful, should be above justice. The question is, are you with us? Because we're going to need all the help we can get to win this fight. And make no mistake, this is a fight for the soul of our democracy, a fight for the meaning of justice, a fight for the future of our country. Cory Booker fired the first shot yesterday. Now it's up to the rest of us to finish what he started.